And so with that, I would like to, I'm so honored to be able to be here to introduce Anthony Flaccavento.
Thank you, Karen. I'm embarrassed that you're honored, but I'm grateful nevertheless. Thanks a lot to Kelsey and Tiziana for organizing this. It's great to have Danica and Lee here. I'm just thrilled. That's an extra bonus being up in this part of the world. And actually several people that I met either during my campaign or various kind of progressive functions over the years. So I'm going to run through this, and what you'll see is that this presentation, which is certainly not the only tool we're going to use, but right now it's kind of our main tool to communicate about the Green New Deal. I've been the driver with it, but with lots of additions, lots of modifications, lots of input from the whole team of people that are involved with the Green New Deal. It does have a focus on trying to present it in a way that's really gonna connect to people who are not already in the choir. So hopefully you'll get that sense as you go along. So the Green New Deal. Essentially in the next 20 to 25 minutes, we'll talk, thanks, that's perfect. We'll talk about why we need it, do we need it, and if so, why? What are the main goals or planks, we're calling them now, who's gonna benefit, and at the end, what you can do, which will come out in the Q&A particularly. So we've got some serious problems. You know, we have a low unemployment rate in Virginia and nationally for sure, but that masks tremendous problems of inequality, massive inequality that is only getting worse, all kinds of economic, class, and racial injustice, and a lot of problems related to the ecosystem. First and foremost, climate change, but many others as well. So how did we get here? And why do we need something as ambitious and as comprehensive as the Green New Deal? So this graph looks at the change in the US population between 1980, the year of Ronald Reagan's election, it was first term, and 2016, basically today. And we grew from 230 million people to 320 million people, a modest amount of growth, a little over 40%. During that exact same period of time, the economy increased in size by this amount. Now look at that again. Between 1980 and the present, the population grew by 43%. The economy, after adjusting for inflation, grew by almost threefold, dramatically more. Now what that means when we say the economy grew, because we always talk about the gross domestic product and is the economy growing and is it growing fast enough, and Democrats and Republicans alike are always talking about grow the economy, that's their main issue. What that means when we say the economy is 3 times bigger compared to 1980, it means 3 times more business transactions, 3 times more goods and services being produced and purchased in the marketplace, 3 times more cash in one form or another, money moving through the economy. Population grew this much, the economy grew this much. So the big question is, why aren't most of us much better off? Because there's a whole lot more money per capita in the country today compared to 1980. We should all be dramatically better off. In fact, most of us are at treading water or have gone backwards. Well, we know the biggest reason, of course, is because most of that increase in economic activity, most of that money made has concentrated in the top. It continued to concentrate in the top during the Clinton years and the Obama years, I hate to tell you. It's just the Republicans are unabashed about their desire to concentrate it in the top and how that's such a good thing. But it happens through Democrat and Republican alike. And of course, the 2017 tax plan only made it far, far worse. Another huge factor in how this has happened is the long-term decline of unions. From nearly a third of all workers in the economy back at the economic heyday in the 50s to now about 6 or 7% in the private sector, about 11% overall. With the decline in unions goes a decline in bargaining power of workers, goes the concentration of wealth, goes the 300 to 1 CEO to worker pay raise. So we talk a lot about trickle-down economics, and if anything's trickled down, it's missed rural America, it's missed communities of color, and you could say it's missed most everyday Americans. The disparities, of course, are concentrated both by place, like in some of our poorest rural and urban communities, and by color. with the wealth disparity being 20-fold between black and white families. Now that's not something that's just happened in the last 40 years, but it's gotten worse. And that impact, that race and class impact, is not only a question of lower income, lower earning, lower accumulated wealth, but it's also who gets to choose what happens in their community. And so that when communities like Union Hill try to stand up to keep a compressor to move gas through a pipeline up, they're up against a big battle, as are poor rural white communities and Native American communities along those pipeline routes. So that's one set of problems. We've got this economy based on growth and trickle-down economics, and it ain't trickling down. It's going up. It's being sucked up. Another is this problem of economic externalities, that so much economic activity, we don't pay the real cost for it. So when we flip our switch to get our electric power, this is part of the side impact of that, mountaintop removal in Southwest Virginia and all over the country, as well as the right now extreme rate of black lung. Even though the number of miners, coal miners, is a tiny fraction of what it was, the percentage of them that have advanced black lung is through the roof now. 30, almost 40 years after black lung protective legislation was supposedly passed. And then of course you have the problem of climate change, which we'll talk about in great detail here. I know this group, I don't need to go into much detail about it. You know that not only is the United Nations panel telling us how dire it is, but our own government is telling us, our own federal assessment last year told us just how dire the situation is. One of the reasons for that is that for the most part, economic growth, when we have a so-called healthy economy, which we don't, but when we have a growing economy, our emissions go up as well. And there's no reason why we can't de-link economic prosperity from environmental impact. But right now, when the economy grows, so do our emissions. So this trickle-down economy, it's concentrated wealth, it's perpetuated injustice rather than lifting boats, and it's pitted environmentalists and progressives, people like those of us in this room, probably most of us, against people in the countryside. We've been part of that, is my critique. We've enabled that. We've exacerbated that. But it's also been the very heavily invested and carefully crafted message of Fox News and Breitbart and the Republican Party and conservative leadership. But right now, we're in this very ironic and terrible situation where the people who live closest to the ecosystem, farmers like myself, loggers who work in the woods, and even professional foresters, fishermen and women, those folks who depend on the ecosystem in a much more intimate and everyday way than most of us here do, hate environmentalists. A lot of them, a high percentage, hate environmentalists. So something is fundamentally wrong that we've gotten to that point. So we believe between the failure, the abject failure of trickle down, the perpetuation of injustice and the concentration of wealth, and the ecological collateral damage of this economy, it's time for a Green New Deal. And it's green in the sense that it fits within the ecosystem. And by that we mean both locally, our rivers, our landscape, our forests, our water, as well as the biosphere as a whole. And it's a New Deal because we're saying whatever tweaking and tinkering and whatever else we've done up to this point, it has not generated the kind of real prosperity that would help people. So now we're going to look at the 4 planks of the Green New Deal. Now this could change, and Karen is more up to speed on this, but when Sam Rasool first introduced this legislation in just this past January in the 2019 session, he put together a resolution that had 4 planks, and that's still what we're working from. Again, as Karen said, there's 8 working groups, so this could evolve. And the first one is that we need the Green New Deal to foster a just and equitable transition to 100% renewables. So 100% renewables is key. 2030 was the goal set forth. But the co-equal with that key is that we get there not on the backs of workers, but by lifting up workers. And workers who've been left out, workers who will be dispossessed in coal country, and those who are doing fracking now, we got to be able to do it in a way that lifts up workers. We're encouraged because what we see in green jobs generally is that they tend to pay better and they tend to have a higher rate of unionization. So we think we can get there. How do we do it? So here's where my bottom-up lens comes in. I'm always looking for examples that exemplify. Well, here's an example from across the country in Bellingham, Washington, where they were doing a Habitat for Humanity community, 30 homes, low to moderate income, very affordable. And on top of the usual habitat standards of a safe, warm, dry home, they put solar panels on the roofs of every home to bring down the electric bills and to make those families more self-sufficient. We're even beginning to see solar panels going on old strip mines. Now, in Southwest Virginia, the first funding for that has just been secured. This example is from Eastern Kentucky, but it looks like we'll be able to get it in Southwest Virginia soon. I've been reading about this. You all would know much more than I, but I understand that the biggest solar farm in the region is going to be going up, maybe online by next spring in Oaksville, on a farm property that was donated by the owner. It's going to be enough electricity to take care of about 3,300 homes, as I understand it. We're seeing it also in energy efficiency. Now, that's a very key part of the Green New Deal, because energy efficiency is the low-hanging fruit. It's the easiest way to get emissions reduction, cost savings, and reduced environmental impact overall. Now, on the other side, they're talking about this goal of getting all of our old building stock, homes, community buildings, churches, weatherized, winterized, and up to speed on energy efficiency is elitist. How is that elitist to save people money on their electric bill? I don't know. But here's an example you can give, comes from southeastern Kentucky. These folks are weatherizing people's homes, putting in new windows, bringing down their electric bill, their heating and cooling dramatically. And then the low income and working families that are getting these services they're not getting it as a grant, they're paying back through the savings on their utility bill. So if they were averaging $300 a month to heat and cool their home, and it was never really warm in the winter because they're old and drafty, after the new windows, the insulation, and everything else is done, then they take some of that savings and they pay off that bill and they get to keep the rest. It's a win-win. We're seeing it in terms of the expanded, and I'm no fan of Dominion, but Dominion continues to assert that they're planning to do a substantial amount of offshore wind.
Do you believe that?
I don't, let's say I'm agnostic. Well, that's what a lot of people fear, but there has been some movement forward on it. So I was with you there, but I have seen some developments. On the flip of that, of course, the president's submitted 2020 budget cut the budget for renewables and energy efficiency almost by 3/4. So that's a little bit about that idea of a just transition. The second plank is about investment. Direct, large-scale investment in job training programs, in renewables and energy efficiency, and a smart grid, and everything else. And lots of groups have studied this. McKinsey, when they studied this, said that if we did a comprehensive effort to really, really bring our building stock up to the kind of energy efficiency we could do, we would save $1 trillion by 2030. It's a little bit like the healthcare debate. Do you want to keep paying through the leakage of so much money being spent on heating and cooling bills over time, or do you want to pay now to save money over the long haul? And McKinsey found that we'd save $1 trillion. Now, a lot of that money is going to be public money. We'd like to see Virginia, as well as the federal government, put money in, but it can absolutely be private money, like what we saw the example in Kentucky with the small scale. But be careful with some of these private investors, because this long statement is a little excerpt from a statement that the 5 big Wall Street banks made about how, as you see, they were going to recognize the problem of climate change and they were going to invest in the alternatives. That's what they said in 2016, that they as institutions were committed to funding the solutions. Between then and now, they've put $1.8 trillion more into fossil fuel investment. So if we're going to get private investment, we better hold people accountable. What would that look like? Well, one big portion of it is training workers for these new jobs. And one example comes from Buffalo. One of the poorest neighborhoods in Buffalo has been engaged for a good long time. You know what? I'm going to turn this off. One of the poorest neighborhoods in Buffalo has been engaged in an effort to completely revitalize the community. And they've been doing it by providing top quality training programs for people who
have been out of work, people who have served time in jail and have come back to the community. And what they've found is they've been able to create living wage, what they call high road jobs. This is some of the folks doing it. But the work that they're doing is specific to their community. Those men and women are now turning around, rehabbing old homes that were vacant, making old vacant lots into community gardens and urban parks. They've been building ecological features to deal with stormwater runoff, and they've trained over 100 people and are employing people throughout West Buffalo. So that's the kind of job training.
Who pays them?
Well, that's usually contract work. So if they're doing rehab, let's say of an old building, it's even a private investor that has it, or it's the city of Buffalo. Similar thing happening in southern West Virginia with the Coalfield Development Corporation. They have a training program for laid off miners, and the unique features, because there's all kinds of job training, are twofold. One is that it's 40 hours a week of training for 6 months. 33 of it is on-the-job training in existing businesses. The other 6 is classroom. So it's real in-depth and hands-on. The other feature is they're not just training people in generic skills, they're training them for 4 emerging occupations in southern West Virginia. Solar installation is one, mountaintop farming is the second, third is construction, and the fourth is deconstruction, taking down old buildings, salvaging and reutilizing materials. They're putting everybody that goes through their training is getting a good job at the end so far. So we know that this whole investment in energy efficiency not only is going to cut our emissions, cut our fuel bills, but it puts people to work. All kinds of estimates put between 500,000 and 1 million jobs if we make a commitment to energy efficient building stock. Not only that, but most of the businesses that do that energy efficient work are small businesses. And most of the materials that are used in making buildings more energy efficient are made in the US. So it's a win-win-win-win all the way around an investment in the building stock. This second plank is going to take big investment in things like high-speed rail in the urban corridors and low-speed rail on places like I-81, and it's also going to mean investment in innovative businesses like Acme Panel in Radford, where they're building super insulated building panels for homes, for buildings, for community centers, in which they cut the they cut the utility use in half when you build with this. This is an existing business. We should be able to see through the Green New Deal big investments in big public projects and small investments in these kinds of innovative businesses. Third goal is the absolute priority of clean air and clean water for all Virginians. Whatever the economic strategy, we cannot get away from that because we know the disaster on health and the economy when we allow our water to be contaminated. Now, some of that's a matter of old infrastructure in small towns and big cities with contaminated water. Some of it's new threats like the pipelines that we need to be able to fight off. When we have clean water, we get not only healthier people, but we also create economic opportunities. The folks who've been working on the Elizabeth River cleanup for 3 decades now, and they're beginning to see the fruits of their labor, they're also seeing a return of some of the species, some of the edible, harvestable species that used to be part of the Elizabeth River ecosystem that you couldn't touch for a long time. And down in Southwest Virginia, in the little town of St. Paul, that's an image of the Clinch River there. St. Paul, an old coal town, has made the Clinch River and its preservation as the most biodiverse river in the United States the centerpiece of their economic development strategy. So they've gone from extracting coal as the basis for their economy to now restoring the Clinch River as the essence of their economic strategy going forward. We're not that far from the coast here, a lot closer than when I started out this morning, but this fella, Bren Smith, is another pioneer in fisheries, and I would love to see him come down the coast a little bit. Bren, who I've met a couple of times, he quit high school at 15. He was a commercial fisherman all across the East Coast and the West Coast up into Canada. He was part of the depletion of many fisheries, and he realized at some point in his early 40s this wasn't working out too well, not for him, not for the marine ecosystem. Bren has created this amazing system he calls vertical ocean farming that uses different species of seaweed and seagrass to clean up the local marine ecosystem, and then through vertical columns he raises clams, mussels, oysters, and scallops. They're super clean. He gets a premium price for them, and that seaweed that he's using to clean it up, it sequesters phenomenal amounts of carbon. Then it's harvested and it's dried and ground up and used as either a human or animal high-density nutrient supplement. Amazing system, amazing. It's what Wendell Berry calls solving for pattern. And Bren is teaching fishermen who are tired of the old routine up and down the East Coast. We need to get them in Virginia. Last plank of the Green New Deal is near and dear to my heart. It's investments in small-scale, local, sustainable agriculture. Hemp, this gentleman is one of the leading hemp farmers in the state. The jury's still out on hemp in terms of how it's going to work for small farmers, but clearly it's a valuable, useful crop, relatively low input, could be part of rural revitalization in a lot of places without a lot of ecological impact. One thing that is so important for those of us in towns and cities is to remember that agriculture typically, when we talk climate change, and if we're in a group of environmentalists, agriculture is on the bad list. It's on the bad list as contributing to the emissions problem. And certainly it does, as it's practiced a lot. But I'm here to tell you that the right kind of farming, whether it's rotational grazing with many different species of animals on pasture, whether it's organic fruits and vegetables in a low-till operation like I do, whether it's grains, it not only produces healthier foods, meats, dairy, and other things, but it actually pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it in the ground. You know, we all know we have way too much carbon in the atmosphere. That's the essence of climate change. What a lot of people don't know is that over the last century, we've given up between 50 and 70% of our soil carbon. So our soils are carbon starved, and the right kind of farming practice pull it out of the atmosphere and put it in the ground. This is a little picture from my farm using cover crops to serve that function. To do that, we have to be able to create the infrastructure that allows farmers to make a living doing that. So in our food and agriculture working group, we're talking about it. And one of the areas we hope the Green New Deal will do is investment in local foods infrastructure, because that helps people eat better, but it also helps create better paying markets for farmers who are using these sustainable practices. And it isn't just farms, because more than 3 to 1 in Virginia are forests to farmland. Forests are absolutely critical. We're lucky we have forests that self-generate if you treat them properly. We worked in Southwest Virginia to create a vertically integrated flooring business. And the two gals there, Jennifer and Shea Wagner, that's their forest in Meadowview, Virginia, after we had completed our sustainable timber harvest. You could barely tell anything had happened. The wood that came out of their forest and some others was made into hardwood flooring at a plant we built in Castlewood, and then that's a picture from the Bristol Public Library. That idea that doing the right thing on farms and in forests doesn't have to mean just don't do anything. It can mean do the right thing, create market incentives to help people do that. So who benefits? Those are the 4 planks. Who do we think will benefit? First of all, people. As we've seen already, the potential for not just jobs, but better paying jobs, jobs more likely to be union, is very high. The impacts for small businesses, whether they're doing energy retrofits, solar installation, sustainable farming, are really there. And most of all, we've got to make sure that the Green New Deal contributes not only to good jobs and better paying jobs, but that it helps create economic diversity that increases the resilience of communities. Because when you hear the critique of the Green New Deal, it starts off with its socialism, right? And then if the critique's coming from a Democrat, it's usually that it's just too expensive, or it's big government. You know, we just can't afford it. It's a nice idea, but it's pie in the sky. But in fact, there's every reason to think that the Green New Deal done right will contribute to community self-reliance and community resilience, which saves money in every respect we can think. So when you hear about it being an unaffordable pipe dream, fight back against that, because every study says that ultimately the nation will be saving money, individuals will be saving money on their fuel bills, on their gas bills for their vehicles, on their home heating bills, and so much so that even these 2 conservative groups, the Conservative Energy Network and the Center for Responsible Energy Solutions, 2/3 and 3/4 of the folks there, conservatives, self-described conservatives, say they want more federal government action for clean energy. So let's build a Green New Deal that helps people help themselves. Now, I don't think the Green New Deal is by itself going to be investing in community gardens, but when we start focusing on community resilience and community self-reliance, things like community gardens in small towns just will be part of this rebuilding of our community. There'll be investments in urban ag as well as in rural ag. And this fellow, Will Allen, who's got the net there, There's a brilliant gentleman from Milwaukee who's created this integrated system of raising fish, vegetables, and everything in a small space, what he calls aquaponics, that absolutely is phenomenally productive and very good. Now, as we move forward with solar, the other thing we want to see in the Green New Deal is changing the legislative climate in Virginia so that we can have community solar. Because right now, if you want to have several families, as they've done here, go in on building a community solar farm, Virginia is going to treat you as though you're a utility, which makes it impossible. We need to change the legislation because community solar allows people to buy in at all levels. You don't have to be a homeowner. You could be a renter who can only afford to pay for 1 or 2 panels, but you can be part of your community's movement towards clean energy. Same thing goes for our transportation system. We have a working group working on that, not only about the mass transit that we talked about earlier, but it's encouraging to know that Richmond has committed to bike lanes. And one other thing that we really, really will be pushing for, I believe, throughout all of this is, again, good jobs, yes, jobs that reward small businesses and family farmers and sustainable enterprises, but also pushing towards more worker ownership. Worker ownership, along with unions, those two might be the single most important steps we could take to create real economic justice. Because in worker-owned businesses, people get paid better. When there's a downturn or an economic crisis, they respond by sharing the pain rather than letting people go. The money circulates within the workers rather than going to the boss. It's a tremendously important thing to do. I'm going to just wind up here because I want to get to the conversations. But I want to say a couple of other things. So as we think about this, so I've been very involved in the local economy movement, local farm and food movement for a long time. And just a few points I want to say. Because again, a lot of this is going to come down to a question of money. People are going to say, how are you going to pay for this? And over, we have to make the argument that this will pay for itself. One way it does is when you invest in what I've come to call community capital. There's many kinds of community capital. One form of it is a farmer's market. You get tremendous bang for your buck. This is an image from the Abingdon Farmers Market, where I am, in Southwest Virginia. Abingdon's a town of 8,000 people. We started in a parking lot. After 3 or 4 years of building up our market, the town let us move to a better parking lot. After another 3 or 4 years of building the market, the town built this pavilion. This pavilion now is home for 50 farmers every Tuesday afternoon and every Saturday morning. We get between 1,200 and 2,000 customers come through on a Saturday morning. Not only that, on Thursday nights, it's the site for the Thursday night jams that brings people together from all over. All of that is community capital. It's revitalizing the community. It's a small amount of money spent as opposed to every one of those farmers. And it's also incubating new businesses like Nicole Dyer's White Birch Cafe, where she started making these all local breakfast sandwiches and high energy juice at the farmer's market. And after building her business and her customer base, she now has a very successful restaurant, just like Wolf Natural Elms has a very successful farm supply. This incubation is a critical thing we should be looking for. How do we build that capacity? Another point is about paying now versus paying later. Do you know that the fast food companies spend a little over $4 billion a year to market their products to us, right? Did you know that that's a tax write-off for them? The way our tax system works, you can write off marketing and promotional expenses. So what that means is that we, as taxpayers, are subsidizing McDonald's and everybody else to convince us to buy their supersized portions of food. And then we're turning around and spending a fraction of that $4 billion to try to convince Americans to eat better and eat healthier. Something is wrong with that. What's happening here, this image, is one of a new phenomenon within the local food movement of mobile markets, of taking healthy local food, produce, meats, dairy, to lower income communities. Now that's a little more expensive in the short term, but think about the money we would save if we had more of those mobile markets and less fast food promotion. So I am going to just wrap it up there and just say this, that what I most like about the Green New Deal, it's driven by climate change. It's driven by the utter urgency of climate change. But it is first and foremost, in my mind, it's an economic strategy, more so than an environmental strategy. It's a recognition that the way we've been going about creating economic prosperity hasn't worked. And that we want to redo that so that ultimately people, communities, and the ecosystem are not collateral damage of economic prosperity or economic development, but they are actually built into the system, baked into the system, so that the economy promotes health, the economy sustains the land and the environment, and the economy helps rekindle community resilience and self-reliance. That's what we think the Green New Deal can do. That's what we think it will do. That's it. Thanks.